This week's Parshat Shelach, is a very dramatic Parsha, as we all know, because it talks about Chet HaMeraglim, the Chet of the spies. And though Sefer Bamidbar, especially these two Parshiot and the upcoming Parshiot, mention many of the sins of Am Yisrael in the Midbar, Chet HaMeraglim apparently is definitely the most significant and the most far-reaching with its consequences. As we all know, according to Chazal, the Meraglim came back on Tisha B'Av, and like Rashi and Chazal point out, Hashem says, just because you cried in vain on this night of Tisha B'Av, so you will cry in the future, but not in vain. And without going into this too deeply right now, just it seems, and Chazal always pointed this out, that almost all the suffering of the Jewish people in all generations to come, especially in the Galut and the exile, are all consequences of Chet HaMeraglim. And obviously this is a very broad topic which needs a lot of time to discuss. I just want to touch on one particular aspect of Chet HaMeraglim. As we've mentioned, this whole episode is attributed to the Meraglim. It's called Chet HaMeraglim. But if we look at the consequences of what happened, the truth of the matter is that everybody was punished for this episode. And though the Meraglim apparently were punished immediately, that whole generation of people are also punished for this sin. But yet the Torah and Chazal attribute this Chet to the Meraglim. It's called Chet HaMeraglim. And Rashi at the beginning of the Parsha at least gives us one aspect of what was Chet HaMeraglim. Rashi points out and asks the famous question, why does the Torah put this episode immediately after the end of last week's Parsha, which was the episode of Miriam and Aaron talking about Moshe? And Rashi famously says at the beginning of the Parsha, Lama nismacha Parshat Meraglim and Parshat Miriam. Why are these Parshiot juxtaposed? Because Miriam was punished with tzarat for speaking lashon hara about her brother, and these Reshaim saw, and they did not take musar. They didn't learn from what they had seen. And indeed, the Torah itself seems to imply that at least one of the elements of Chet HaMeraglim is the Chet of lashon hara. They spoke badly. They spoke badly about Eretz Yisrael. And the question is, we all understand that lashon hara is a very bad thing. Obviously, it's a very serious thing. But is that really the source or the foundation, the basis of the greatest sin in the history of Am Yisrael, Chet HaMeraglim? Is Chet HaMeraglim the Chet of lashon hara? And another question about lashon hara is that anybody who's ever read a bit of the Chafetz Chaim's work, the book Chafetz Chaim or Shmirat HaLashon, where he's basically devoted everything to discussing these issues of lashon hara and the halachot of lashon hara, and one of the Sfarim is in fact devoted completely to discussing the severity of lashon hara. And obviously, I mean, there's actually endless quotes of Chazal that speak about the seriousness of lashon hara. I just want to share two of those quotes, which seem to be disproportionate to the issue itself. Chazal say, for example, in Masechet Erechin, they say, "Nimtza ha'omer b'fiv chamur min ha'oseh ma'aseh." Chazal say, we see from this, without going into the details, that a person who says something is worse than a person who does something. And what's their proof? Sheken lo nichtam gzar dinam shel avotenu bamidbar ela al lashon hara. Because we see that the decree on the Jewish people in the wilderness was solely because of the Aveira of lashon hara. And they quote a pasuk which says, "Vayinasoti zeh 10 pamim." And Chazal, in other words, Chazal quote a pasuk which points out that Am Yisrael tested and tried Hashem many times, 10 times, and yet the decree was only passed because of the Avira of Lashon Hara and Chet HaMeraglim. Again, it seems to be disproportionate to all these other Avirot that Am Yisrael do, in the way that they test God, but it's not just the final blow. The issue that basically decided the decree was the Avira of Lashon Hara, or another famous Gemara. The Gemara says also in Masechet Erechin in the same place, Kol HaMesapeh Lashon Magdil Avonot Keneged Shalosh Avirot. The Gemara says over there, a person who speaks Lashon Hara is basically committing a crime equivalent to the three most serious crimes that we all know, Avodah Zarah, adultery, and murder. And Chazal basically equate Lashon Hara to those three of the most terrible sins in the Torah. And why is that? Why is Lashon Hara considered such a terrible thing? A terrible thing, apparently, beyond what we would sort of intuitively think is wrong with Lashon Hara. And I think the answer to that question is, and I think it's something we also see very clearly in the Parshat. What the Meraglim do, for whatever reasons they did it, which is obviously a topic for another discussion, is they come back to Moshe and Aaron and to the Jewish people, and they give their report about Eretz Yisrael. And obviously they didn't want the Jewish people to go in, again, for whatever reason. But then, if you look at the Psukim, it seems that when things start becoming argumentative between Yoshua and Caleb and the other Meraglim, the Meraglim basically resort to Lashon Hara. Meaning, if at first, initially in the report, it seems to be partially positive, and part of the report seems to be impartial. However, when they see that Yoshua and Caleb start to influence the people in what Yoshua and Caleb think is a positive way, but in their eyes a negative way, so then they resort to Lashon Hara. And then they start saying really bad things about the people. They start describing the inhabitants in an exaggerated way. And also, which is sometimes overlooked, is that they also basically through their speech imply the inadequacy of the Jewish people to cope with the situation, implying that they are weak and they won't be able to stand in war against them, and so on and so forth. Now, again, all these things might be true in their minds, but the problem is that through their Lashon Hara, they actually create a reality. Through their dibur, they create an image in the eyes of the Jewish people as a whole, of a land which a few minutes ago was Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. They've turned it through their dibur into Eretz Ocheret Yoshvea, a land which devours its inhabitants, a terrible land. Not only that, but they actually turn the Jewish people, who until moments ago maybe felt a certain amount of confidence and a feeling of trust in Hashem, but through their dibur, they basically create a reality where these people are completely inadequate. And as we all know, the famous pasuk that they say that when they went there, they saw these giants, and we were in their eyes as grasshoppers, and so we were in our own eyes. That's what they say. And through their dibur, they basically create that reality. And I think the reason why Lashon Hara is such a terrible avera is because through a person's dibur, we actually create realities. Whether those realities are objectively true or not, we create subjectively those realities, and those realities which we've created through our dibur become our true reality. And the problem with that is, as we see in this generation of Dor HaMidbar, is that changing such a thing can be very, very difficult and can take a very, very long time. We see after Chet HaMeraglim that there were these group of people that wanted to go up to Eretz Yisrael and to conquer it, and they showed a certain amount of remorse for what they had done, and Moshe Rabbeinu warns them and says, don't do it, because you're not going to succeed. And indeed Moshe understands that the Meraglim have created a reality which is going to take a very, very long time to fix. In fact, it took even 40 years. And what's interesting is that when Yoshua sends Meraglim to Yericho 40 years later, and the Meraglim go to, as we all know the story, they go to Yericho and they go to the house of Rachav Azonah, And they perform a very different mission to the Meraglim in this parsha. In fact, they don't actually spy out the land at all. They don't even get any military information or topographical information. In fact, the only thing they found out from Rachav in Yericho is that she tells them about the state of mind of the people in Eretz Canaan. And she tells Yoshua, she tells the Meraglim of Yoshua that the people in Eretz Canaan are basically familiar with the story of Am Yisrael. They know what's happened to them, what Hashem has done to them through Yetziat Mitzrayim and all the years in the Midbar, and they are completely frightened, and their hearts have melted. And that's all the Meraglim had to hear. That's all they had to know. They didn't find out anything else. They went straight back to Yoshua, reported it, and Yoshua then started the conquering of Eretz Yisrael again, because what Yoshua now understood is what was the reality that the people of Eretz Canaan were living in, and that was the decisive issue for him. And that, unfortunately, is what the Meraglim did to the Jewish people. This Chet HaMeraglim is through a person's dibur, how they create this reality. And again, obviously I don't want to go into this too much right now, but like I said at the beginning, Chet HaMeraglim is such a cardinal sin, and Chazal have always pointed out that it's a sin which basically lives on with us. And how we have to be careful about even sometimes how a situation might be, or how we might feel about a certain thing. One has to be very careful about what one says publicly, what one says to their children, to their students, to their surroundings. How sometimes those words create a reality for a person which more than most times becomes very, very difficult to change. I just want to end with a short quote of Rav Kook. In fact, just 2 lines, which I was actually quite surprised to come across. Rav Kook in Orot HaKodesh has got actually quite a few pages where he devotes to the concept of dibur, this issue of the power of speech. And he says, for example, I'll just read one quote. He says, "Rav Kook says, a person has Ruach HaKodesh, which is the highest level. Ruach HaKodesh is the highest level in the process in Mesilat Yesharim. It's the end, which he doesn't even talk about. In fact, Rav Kook says that the person has Ruach HaKodesh becomes clear to them the power of speech. It's unbelievable. As you reach Ruach HaKodesh, what's one of the major things that you understand is the Koach HaDibur. In the very next paragraph, without reading the quote inside, Rav Kook talks about what dibur creates. When a person says something, Rav Kook in his poetic, sort of mystical style, talks about how a word or words or dibur open worlds, create realities, and therefore, obviously, understanding the power of dibur is extremely important. And Samei Bezrat Hashem, our diburim be diburim tovim, positive diburim, be a tikkun for Chet HaMeraglim. Shabbat Shalom.